The sun was setting over the small town of Brooksville, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. On the edge of town, just off the highway, stood a small gas station that locals often used after work. It was a warm summer evening, and the air carried the faint smell of fuel mixed with freshly cut grass from a nearby field. Tasha Miller pulled into the station, tired from a long day at the diner where she worked double shifts to support her two young kids. She drove an old blue sedan, the kind that rattled whenever it stopped, but it was all she could afford. Her mind was on dinner plans, bills waiting on the kitchen table, and getting home in time to tuck her children into bed. As she stepped out of the car, she reached into her purse for her debit card and started filling the tank. She wasn't paying much attention to the world around her. Her phone was buzzing with texts from her sister, and her thoughts were already at home. That was when a white police cruiser slowly pulled into the station. Inside was Officer Daniel Riker, a man everyone in Brooksville knew by name. He had been on the force for more than a decade and had a reputation for being strict, sharp, and, at times, confrontational. Many respected him, others feared him. To some, he represented safety, but to others, he represented tension. Riker parked his car behind Tasha's sedan and stepped out, his tall figure casting a shadow on the ground. His expression was serious as he scanned the area, his gaze locking on her vehicle. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice firm but controlled, "I need you to step away from the car." For the months following the fire and the gas station incident marked a period of slow but meaningful change for Brooksville. For Tasha Miller, life had returned to its familiar routines in many ways, getting her children ready for school, working long hours at the diner, preparing dinner, and helping her kids with homework. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythms, her life had transformed profoundly. She had become a recognized voice in her community, a person people looked to for guidance, advocacy, and reassurance. People who had never spoken to her before now waved as she walked through town. Some stopped her to share stories of their own experiences with fear, misunderstanding, or interactions with law enforcement. Others sought advice on how to navigate difficult encounters safely and calmly. Tasha embraced her role with a quiet determination. She knew she had not asked for fame, and she did not seek it. She only wanted to ensure that what had happened to her would not happen to others. Slowly, she began organizing workshops at local community centers, teaching residents how to communicate effectively with authorities, how to stay calm in tense situations, and how to document encounters without putting themselves at risk. At one workshop, she spoke to a room full of adults, teenagers, and parents. "You don't have to be afraid of the world," she said gently, her voice steady but firm. "You can take steps to protect yourself, and you can help others do the same. Knowledge and understanding are powerful tools. And above all, kindness and respect can change how we all interact." The participants listened quietly, some taking notes, others nodding in agreement. Afterward, several approached her, thanking her for speaking. One young man said, "You make me feel like I'm not alone in this." Another mother smiled, tears in her eyes, saying, "Your story gives me hope." It was moments like these that reminded Tasha why she had chosen to speak up. Her courage and composure at the gas station had been frightening in the moment, but it had opened the door to something larger, a community willing to reflect, learn, and grow. For Daniel Riker, the months after the fire and the administrative leave were equally transformative, though in a very different way. Losing his home had been a shock, but it had forced him to slow down and confront the consequences of his actions. Gone were the distractions of routine and material possessions, in their place was time to reflect, learn, and adapt. Riker began attending workshops and meetings aimed at improving community relations. At first, he felt awkward and defensive, unsure if he belonged in a room with residents and colleagues who had been critical of him. Over time, however, he began to understand the perspectives of those he had affected, recognizing that his perception of following procedure had not always aligned with the experiences of others. He also took steps to rebuild relationships with colleagues at the police department. Though trust was not restored overnight, honest conversations, accountability measures, and sincere efforts to improve earned him cautious respect from some of his peers. Riker's reflections extended beyond work. Sitting quietly in temporary living spaces, he considered the fragility of life, the unpredictability of events, and the power of human connection. The fire, the viral video, and the intense public scrutiny had stripped away many illusions about control and permanence. What remained was clarity about what truly mattered: compassion, understanding, and responsibility. The town of Brooksville itself was changing. People who had previously gone about their lives without much thought about community relations now engaged in dialogue. Town meetings were held to discuss safety, fairness, and transparency. Local schools began teaching programs on civic responsibility, respect, and how to engage with authorities appropriately. The conversations were not always easy. Some people still disagreed, some still held resentment, and others struggled to understand the perspectives of different sides. But the dialogue, once absent, had begun to flow, bridging gaps that had existed quietly for years. Tasha found herself increasingly involved in these efforts. She worked with local leaders, lawyers, and community organizers to create educational materials, hold public discussions, and provide guidance to residents who might feel powerless in tense situations. Each day, she witnessed small changes. Neighbors who had been wary of speaking now shared their stories, young people who had been uncertain about authority now asked thoughtful questions, and the town slowly moved toward a stronger sense of mutual understanding. Riker, observing some of these changes from a distance, began to reflect on how his own actions had contributed to the town's awakening. While he could not undo the fear and tension he had caused at the gas station, he realized that accountability and personal growth were meaningful steps toward redemption. In one notable meeting at the community center, Riker spoke quietly to a group of residents, including Tasha, though he remained at the back of the room. "I want to acknowledge that my actions have consequences," he said. "I am learning how to do better, and I hope to rebuild trust where it has been lost. I know that takes time, and I am committed to that process." While some residents listened cautiously, others nodded in recognition. The room's atmosphere was a mix of skepticism, hope, and tentative forgiveness. It was clear that change was possible, but only if both sides remained committed to understanding and accountability. As the seasons shifted from summer into fall, life in Brooksville settled into a new rhythm. Tasha continued her work, balancing her responsibilities at home with her advocacy efforts. Her children thrived, inspired by their mother's courage and resilience. Neighbors grew more engaged, discussions became more constructive, and the community slowly felt safer and more connected. Riker, too, found a quieter balance. He had accepted that some relationships and perceptions could not be fully restored, but he could control his actions moving forward. He worked diligently to improve his communication skills, engage respectfully with the public, and act in ways that reflected both responsibility and humility. The fire and the gas station incident had changed him profoundly, teaching lessons he would carry for the rest of his life. One evening, Tasha stood on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink. She reflected on the past months: the fear, the uncertainty, the public attention, and the growth that had emerged from adversity. Her children played nearby, laughing and carefree, unaware of the tension that had once filled their lives. She thought about Daniel Riker, about the fire, about the viral video, and about the power of one moment to set off a chain reaction that could change lives. She realized that life was unpredictable, that challenges could come without warning, and that courage often came from facing fear head-on. At the same time, she felt a sense of hope. The community was learning, individuals were reflecting, and conversations were happening that had never occurred before. Change was slow, but it was real, and she was part of it. Across town, Riker watched the sunset from a small bench outside his temporary residence. he reflected on the lessons he had learned about accountability, respect, and perception. The fire had destroyed material possessions, but it had also cleared space for self-reflection. The gas station incident had exposed weaknesses in understanding and communication, but it had also created opportunities for growth. He understood now that authority came with responsibility, that every action mattered, and that trust was fragile yet essential. While the past could not be changed, the future was open to intention, honesty, and effort. Both Tasha and Riker had been changed by the events in ways they could never have imagined. One had gained a platform to speak, to educate, and to inspire. The other had learned humility, reflection, and the need for accountability. Together, even indirectly, their experiences had sparked dialogue, understanding, and transformation within their town. As the days turned into weeks, the people of Brooksville began to embrace a new sense of connection. Conversations between residents and law enforcement became more open. Education and community programs grew stronger. Stories of courage and resilience were shared and celebrated. For Tasha, life remained busy but meaningful. For Riker, life remained quiet but reflective. Both had faced moments of fear, uncertainty, and scrutiny, but both had found lessons that would shape the rest of their lives. In the end, Brooksville was no longer the same town it had been before the gas station incident and the fire. The events had sparked awareness, reflection, and progress. They had reminded everyone that mistakes, fear, and challenges could be transformed into opportunities for growth, understanding, and change. And for Tasha and Riker, life went on different, perhaps more difficult at times, but richer with the lessons of resilience, accountability, and the power of human connection. A moment. Startled, Tasha turned around, confused. Is there a problem, officer?" she asked softly, trying to keep her voice calm. The next morning, Tasha woke up earlier than usual. The soft light from the window in the days following the fire, Brooksville was buzzing with curiosity. Neighbors who had witnessed the flames continued to talk about the event, speculating on what had caused it and sharing their opinions about Riker's life and the gas station incident. Social media posts connected the two events in the minds of many, though no direct link existed. For some, the fire seemed like a dramatic turning point, a moment of reckoning, while for others, it was a reminder of how fragile life could be. Daniel Riker spent most of his time outside of his destroyed home, sitting on borrowed couches at relatives' houses or quietly walking the streets at night. The fire had not only destroyed his house but had also taken a piece of his sense of control. Objects that had held memories, photos, awards, even letters were gone. While insurance would replace some material items, the feeling of loss was deeper than anything he could fix with money or paperwork. At the police department, the atmosphere had changed as well. The administration faced growing pressure from the public and city officials to take action regarding Riker's behavior during the gas station incident. Anonymous complaints had been piling up over the years, but now, with video evidence and the fire incident as a dramatic backdrop, scrutiny intensified. One afternoon, Riker was called into a meeting with the chief and several senior officers. The room was tense but professional. "Daniel," the chief said, leaning forward, "the video shows that the interaction at the gas station was not handled in a way that meets our standards. We have no choice but to place you on administrative leave while the department completes a full review of your actions." Riker's stomach tightened. He nodded, understanding that his career, once so certain and secure, was now in jeopardy. "I understand," he said quietly. Outside the meeting, he felt the weight of the world pressing down. He had spent years believing that following procedure was enough. Now he realized that perception mattered as much as intention, and that trust, once broken, was hard to restore. Meanwhile, Tasha was receiving a very different kind of attention. Calls from reporters, advocacy groups, and even local leaders kept coming. She had learned to filter through them carefully, focusing on the messages that encouraged her to speak up and help others. Her own life, however, continued. She still worked long hours at the diner, still cooked dinner for her children, still helped them with homework. But now, she did so with a new awareness of the world around her. She was no longer just a single mother going about her life quietly. She had become a symbol of courage and composure under pressure. One evening, after putting the children to bed, she sat at her kitchen table with a notebook in front of her. She began writing down her thoughts, her feelings about the gas station encounter, and what she hoped to accomplish moving forward. "I want people to understand that these things happen," she wrote. "I want parents to feel safer. I want officers to understand the impact of their actions. This isn't about anger. It's about change." Her words reflected the maturity and determination she had developed in a short time. She knew that public attention could be fleeting, but she hoped her voice could make a lasting difference. Community organizations also started to step in. Meetings were held at local community centers, discussing topics such as trust between law enforcement and residents, safe interactions, and how to support people who had experienced frightening encounters. Tasha was invited to speak at one of these events. Standing at the front of a small auditorium, looking out at the attentive faces of neighbors, she felt a mix of nerves and resolve. "I'm not here to blame anyone," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here to share my experience so that we can make our town safer and more understanding. Everyone deserves respect and fairness, no matter where they go or who they interact with." The audience listened quietly, nodding in agreement. A few people approached her afterward, sharing their own stories and thanking her for speaking. For the first time since the gas station incident, Tasha felt a sense of empowerment. She realized that even difficult experiences could be transformed into a force for good. For Riker, the reality of being on administrative leave forced him to reflect more deeply. He spent long hours alone, considering the choices he had made and the ways he could rebuild trust not just with his colleagues, but with the broader community. It was not an easy process. Pride and habit made it difficult to acknowledge mistakes fully, but he slowly began to understand the perspective of those he had impacted. At the same time, insurance and rebuilding logistics kept him busy. Meetings with adjusters, contractors, and inspectors reminded him of the material loss, but also gave him time to think. Each burned beam, each charred wall, represented a chance to start over in ways that were impossible before. The community's reaction was complex. Some people expressed sympathy for Riker, recognizing that the fire was a devastating event regardless of past controversies. Others remained critical of his actions at the gas station, believing that accountability was more important than material loss. Social media continued to buzz with discussions, balancing perspectives and opinions. Back at home, Tasha continued to manage her dual role as mother and emerging community advocate. She balanced long shifts at work with school pickups, extracurricular activities, and volunteer work with advocacy groups. She started organizing workshops and informational sessions about dealing with law enforcement interactions safely, inviting both residents and police officers to participate. The response was encouraging. Residents shared stories they had never spoken about, officers listened to concerns they had never considered, and slowly, dialogue began to bridge gaps that had existed for years. Tasha felt a sense of accomplishment, small but meaningful. She also stayed in touch with legal representatives who advised her on potential cases regarding the gas station incident. While she hadn't originally planned to pursue legal action, she realized that having knowledgeable guidance allowed her to make informed choices and ensure her safety and rights. In the months that followed, Riker began to take small steps toward accountability. He agreed to attend workshops about community interaction, reflect on the impact of his actions, and participate in departmental reviews. He remained on leave for an extended period, but gradually, he began to rebuild relationships with some colleagues who were willing to guide him. For the residents of Brooksville, the combination of Tasha's advocacy and Riker's reflection sparked broader discussions. Schools included new sessions on community awareness and respect for others, local leaders held town halls, and residents started feeling more empowered to speak up when they witnessed concerning behavior. Despite all the challenges, life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. Tasha's children went back to school with their mother now seen as a role model in the community. Riker started to find routines that allowed him to regain a sense of purpose without the tension of constant scrutiny. Both of their lives had changed, but change often brings growth. One evening, Tasha sat on her porch, looking out at the quiet streets. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over Brooksville. She reflected on the past months, on the fear, the attention, the conversations, and the lessons learned. Life had tested her in ways she never expected, but it had also shown her resilience and courage she hadn't known she possessed. She realized that fear and difficulty didn't have to define her, they could be a catalyst for action, for understanding, for helping others. At the same time, Riker, in his temporary home, looked out at the night sky. He understood that mistakes, misjudgments, and actions, even those taken with good intentions, could have lasting effects. The fire, the incident at the gas station, and the public scrutiny were harsh reminders that life was unpredictable and responsibility was crucial. Both Tasha and Riker, in different ways, were learning about accountability, resilience, and the power of reflection. The town of Brooksville, too, was changing, slowly moving toward a deeper understanding of justice, fairness, and communication between residents and those sworn to serve them. Though the past could not be erased, the future was still unwritten. For everyone involved, the lessons of those difficult weeks were clear: respect, understanding, and dialogue are more powerful than fear, and even the most challenging experiences can inspire growth, compassion, and change. It was a quiet, moonless night in Brooksville. The streets were empty, and the soft hum of distant traffic was the only sound in the still air. Most of the town was asleep, including Tasha and her children, who were tucked safely in their beds after another long day. Meanwhile, Daniel Riker sat in his living room, staring at the glow of a small lamp on the side table. The events of the past weeks weighed heavily on him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the gas station, Tasha's calm but frightened face, and the video spreading across the internet. He had followed procedure, he told himself, yet nothing seemed to make sense anymore. He had become increasingly isolated. Friends and colleagues who once called him regularly now seemed distant or hesitant. He spent hours reviewing news stories about the incident, reading social media posts, some supportive, others critical, most questioning his actions. The feeling of being watched, judged, and scrutinized gnawed at him like a constant whisper in his mind. That night, Riker had been planning to get some rest. He felt tired and restless, unable to sleep with his thoughts spinning. He moved around the house quietly, making sure the windows were locked, the doors secured, and the alarm set. Even so, the sense of unease lingered, a shadow he could not shake. Without warning, a faint smell drifted through the hallway. It was unusual, a slight hint of smoke, so light at first that he thought he might be imagining it. He paused, listening carefully. Then he noticed a small glow reflecting on the ceiling of the living room. Riker's heart began to race. He grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and shone it toward the source. In a matter of seconds, he saw a corner of his living room flicker with a small flame. Panic surged through him, and he immediately reached for his phone to call emergency services. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice answered. There's a fire, in my house. Riker shouted, his voice tight with tension. It's spreading, I need help. The dispatcher's voice remained calm and steady, guiding him, get out of the house immediately. Close the doors behind you if you can. Move to a safe distance and wait for the fire department. Riker didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat and ran outside, the cold night air shocking his senses as he reached the driveway. Behind him, the flames began to grow, licking at the corners of his house, swallowing furniture, photos, and personal belongings in a fierce, orange glow. Neighbors soon noticed the light and came out of their homes, drawn by the bright flames. Some called 911 again, while others simply watched, their faces a mix of fear, concern, and curiosity. A few families quickly gathered their children inside, keeping them away from the growing spectacle. Within minutes, fire trucks arrived, sirens piercing the quiet night. Firefighters jumped into action, connecting hoses, pulling out equipment, and dousing the flames as best they could. Despite their efforts, the fire spread quickly, fed by the wooden structure and old furniture inside. Riker stood at a safe distance, watching helplessly as the place he had called home for years was consumed by fire. He felt a strange mixture of emotions, fear, loss, and disbelief. The photographs of his family, the awards from the police department, even the uniforms and equipment he had used for years, all of it reduced to ashes. He thought about his life before the series of events, when things felt controlled and stable. Now, everything seemed fragile, like it could vanish at any moment. As the fire continued to burn, firefighters managed to contain it, preventing it from spreading to nearby houses. The glow reflected off the faces of the neighbors who had gathered, their expressions silent but attentive. Some whispered to each other, speculating about what had caused the fire. Riker didn't know what to think. He walked slowly to a corner of the yard, leaning against a tree as he tried to catch his breath. The heat from the fire was intense, but it couldn't compete with the heat of embarrassment and anxiety burning inside him. Meanwhile, the news crews who had been following the previous gas station incident caught wind of the fire and quickly arrived on the scene. Cameras flashed, reporters murmured into microphones, and live footage began broadcasting across multiple networks. For Tasha, who watched the coverage from her living room with her kids asleep upstairs, it was surreal. She hadn't wished anything bad on anyone, but she couldn't ignore the strange timing, the sudden shift in attention from one story to the next. Across town, community members discussed the incident quietly but with growing curiosity. No one knew the cause for sure. Some suggested it could have been an accident, others hinted at coincidence. Regardless, it became the topic of conversation in homes, workplaces, and online forums. For Riker, the fire marked a turning point. He realized that life could change in an instant, and control was never guaranteed. Watching the flames destroy his home made him confront his choices, the public's perception, and the life he wanted versus the life he had created. He felt an emptiness that went beyond material loss, a feeling that his reputation, his career, and his sense of security were all vulnerable in ways he had never anticipated. Over the next few days, investigators visited the site, carefully examining the remains of the house. The official reports suggested an electrical fault might have started the fire, though Riker couldn't help but wonder if there was more to it. He spent long hours sitting on the curb outside the destroyed house, staring at the charred remains, reflecting on the past weeks, and thinking about the confrontation with Tasha that had started it all. For Tasha, the fire became another reminder of how unpredictable life could be. She had been living in the aftermath of the gas station incident, trying to adjust, process her emotions, and regain a sense of normalcy for her children. The fire, though not directly connected to her, made her realize how one event could ripple through the lives of many, creating changes that no one could fully anticipate. Neighbors, journalists, and friends reached out to Riker. Some offered support, recognizing that he had lost his home and personal belongings. Others maintained their distance, unsure of how to react to the unfolding situation. Riker tried to process the complexity of human response, the mix of sympathy, judgment, and curiosity, and it added another layer to the mental weight he carried. In the weeks following the fire, temporary measures were taken. Riker stayed with relatives while he sorted through insurance claims and planned for the future. The fire had destroyed nearly everything, but it had also created a space for reflection. He began to think seriously about the decisions he had made, the interactions he had with the community, and the way his actions were perceived. Tasha, meanwhile, continued to navigate her own path. She focused on her children, her work, and the growing attention her story was receiving. She spoke with advocacy groups, met with community leaders, and started thinking about ways she could help others avoid similar frightening encounters. Though neither Tasha nor Riker could have predicted the events of the past weeks, both were learning important lessons about life, responsibility, and the consequences of actions both intended and unintended. One person's fear, another person's stress, and a series of coincidences had combined in a way that none of them could ignore. By the time the fire was fully extinguished, and the smoke had cleared, the town had witnessed yet another chapter in the unfolding story. The incident had captured the attention of people far beyond Brooksville, and the discussion about fairness, responsibility, and the fragility of life continued to grow. For Riker, looking at the remains of his home each morning became a form of reckoning. He thought about mistakes made, lessons learned, and the road ahead. For Tasha, the fire underscored the idea that life was unpredictable and that courage and resilience were often required in moments of fear. Though the flames had destroyed a house, they couldn't destroy the lessons that emerged from the past weeks. Both lives, Tasha's and Riker's, were forever changed, and the town of Brooksville would remember the events as a turning point, a story of fear, reflection, and the unexpected consequences that life can bring. Led across her small bedroom, but she had barely slept through the night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flashing lights of the gas station and felt the weight of the officer's words all over again. Her phone buzzed repeatedly on the nightstand. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was just her sister checking in. But when she finally picked it up, dozens of unread messages lit up the screen. Friends, co-workers, even distant relatives were texting her. "Is this you in the video?" one message read. "You're trending online," said another. "Please tell me you're okay." Confused and still half asleep, Tasha opened the first link someone sent her. There it was, the video from the gas station, already uploaded, already shared thousands of times. The shaky footage showed her standing by her car, her hands slightly raised, her voice trembling as she tried to explain herself to Officer Riker. At first, she didn't know how to feel. Seeing herself from the outside made the memory even more real, but also surreal. She hadn't wanted attention. She hadn't wanted strangers watching one of the most frightening moments of her life. But she also noticed something else: the comments below the video. Some were supportive. "This is heartbreaking. She handled it so calmly. She did nothing wrong. Why was she treated like that? This happens too often. Enough is enough." Others questioned what had happened, debating whether Riker had followed proper procedure. Tasha sighed deeply, putting the phone down. She wanted to get up and start breakfast for her kids, but her mind felt heavy. Before she could gather her thoughts, there was a knock at the bedroom door. "Mommy," her son Caleb whispered. "Are we late for school?" She forced a smile, pushing her thoughts aside for the moment. "No, baby. We've got time. Go brush your teeth." By the time she dropped her kids off at school, she noticed people staring at her car as she drove past. Some looked curious, some sympathetic. It was as if, overnight, everyone in town had learned her name. Across town, Officer Daniel Riker sat in his kitchen, staring into a cup of black coffee that had long gone cold. His phone, too, was buzzing non-stop. The department's internal chat group was filled with links to the video, and several colleagues had texted him. Some messages were supportive, short, and simple: "Hang in there, man. Procedures are procedures." Others were less comforting: "You're all over the news. This is bad. Command wants to see you ASAP." Riker rubbed his temples and leaned back in his chair. He replayed the gas station moment in his mind again and again, trying to convince himself he'd handled everything by the book. He told himself he had reason to believe the car matched a stolen vehicle report. He told himself he'd never raised his voice, never crossed the line. But the problem wasn't what he thought anymore, it was what the world thought. By noon, the video had reached local news outlets. A reporter from Channel 5 stood in front of the Brooksville Police Department, microphone in hand. This video, captured by a bystander at a gas station last night, shows a tense encounter between Officer Daniel Riker and Tasha Miller, a local resident, the reporter said. The department has issued a brief statement saying they are reviewing the incident. Tasha's phone rang non-stop that afternoon. Some calls were from journalists wanting interviews. Others were from advocacy groups she had never heard of before, offering legal support. She ignored most of them, unsure of what to say. That evening, however, she received a call she couldn't ignore. It was her manager from the diner. "Tasha, I just want you to know we've got your back," her manager said warmly. "If you need time off, take it. If anyone comes around asking questions here, we'll handle it." Tasha thanked her softly, feeling both relief and unease. She didn't ask for any of this attention, but now it was surrounding her, pulling her into something much bigger than herself. By the end of the week, a small group of community members organized a gathering in front of the police station. Tasha didn't attend, she didn't feel ready, but she saw photos online later. People stood together holding handwritten signs that read things like, "Justice for Tasha. We deserve better. Do the right thing." A local pastor led a prayer for peace, understanding, and accountability, and the video of that, too, went viral. Meanwhile, inside the police department, the atmosphere was tense. Riker was called into a private meeting with Chief Owens, who closed the office blinds before speaking. "This has gotten bigger than Brooksville," the chief said, his tone serious but measured. "We're under pressure from the city council, the mayor, and half the state right now. I need your statement by the end of the day." Riker sat across from him, silent for a moment before finally saying, "I followed procedure." "Maybe you did," the chief replied calmly. "But perception matters, Daniel. The public thinks differently, and we have to address that." Riker left the office feeling more isolated than ever. For years, he'd thought of himself as one of the department's strongest officers. Now, with a single video, everything had shifted. That night, Tasha sat at her kitchen table after putting the kids to bed, her laptop open as she scrolled through emails. One caught her attention. It was from a local attorney named Melanie Grant. "Miss Miller," the email read, "I want you to know that you are not alone. If you'd like to discuss your options, my office is open to you at no cost." Tasha hesitated for a long time before replying. She wasn't sure if she wanted to take legal action, but she also felt the weight of responsibility. People were looking at her, listening to her, expecting her to speak up not just for herself, but for others who'd been in similar situations. She closed the laptop and sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator. The house was quiet, but her thoughts were loud. A few days later, the pressure reached its peak. Channel 5 News aired an interview with Tasha. She hadn't planned on speaking publicly yet, but after meeting with attorney Grant, she decided it was time to tell her side of the story. Sitting on a small sofa in her living room, the cameras captured her calm but steady voice. "I was just coming home from work," she explained. "I stopped for gas, like I always do. I wasn't speeding, I wasn't breaking any rules. But suddenly, I was treated like I did something wrong, and it scared me." The clip aired across multiple networks and was shared thousands of times online. For many people, Tasha became more than just a name on a video. She became a person they could relate to, someone who could have been them or their family. For Officer Riker, however, the situation only grew more complicated. Supporters of the department began rallying online in his defense, insisting he was just doing his job. At the same time, Critics demanded accountability, calling for his suspension until a full review could be completed. Everywhere he went, in grocery stores, coffee shops, even just driving down the street, he felt eyes on him. People whispered, some openly staring, others avoiding his gaze entirely. One evening, while buying groceries, a young man approached him cautiously. "You're Officer Riker, right?" the man asked. Riker nodded slowly, bracing himself. The man hesitated, then said quietly, "I hope you learn from this. People are scared out there." Riker didn't respond, but the words stayed with him long after he left the store. By the end of the second week, the incident had transformed Brooksville. Neighbors who barely spoke before were suddenly gathering at community centers, holding discussions about trust, safety, and fairness. Churches opened their doors for town meetings, and local leaders urged the police department to work with residents to rebuild relationships. Tasha remained at the center of it all, even though she never asked to be. Some days she felt strong and determined to speak up. Other days, she wanted nothing more than to return to her quiet life, taking care of her kids and going to work without cameras and reporters following her. Late one night, she stood on her porch, gazing at the stars. The summer air was warm, carrying the faint sounds of crickets in the distance. She thought about how quickly life had changed, how one ordinary evening at a gas station had spiraled into something so much bigger than herself. Across town, Riker sat in his car, parked outside the station long after his shift had ended. The lights of the building glowed softly, but inside he felt the weight of everything pressing down on him: the questions, the scrutiny, the uncertainty of his future. Two people. Two very different lives. One shared moment that had set off a chain reaction neither of them could have predicted. And the story was only just beginning. "This vehicle," Riker said, pointing at her car, "matches the description of a stolen car reported earlier today." Tasha froze for a moment, struggling to process his words. Her heart began to beat faster, but she steadied herself. "This is my car," she replied carefully. "I've had it for years. I can show you my registration and license." Riker didn't respond right away. His hand rested on his hip, and his eyes narrowed as he studied her. Around them, the station seemed to go quiet. Two other cars were parked near the pumps, their drivers watching curiously but saying nothing. Inside the small store, a cashier looked out the window, sensing something unfolding. "I just need you to step aside while I confirm some details," Riker said, his tone low and authoritative. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Tasha nodded slowly, raising her hand slightly as she moved toward the side of the car. Her voice shook, but she tried to sound cooperative. "Okay, but I promise you, officer, this is a misunderstanding." She glanced around and noticed a young man near another pump pulling out his phone, recording quietly. Others nearby started doing the same. Riker walked around her car, carefully inspecting the plates and peeking through the windows. He asked for her driver's license, which she handed over with slightly trembling hands. He looked at the ID, then back at her. "You live over on Pine Street?" he asked, glancing at the address. "Yes, sir," she answered. "I've lived there my whole life." Something in her voice, earnest, steady despite her nervousness, seemed to give him pause. But instead of easing the tension, he decided to call in her plate number to dispatch. The station remained silent except for the distant hum of traffic passing on the highway. People were watching from their cars, waiting to see what would happen. Tasha's phone buzzed again in her pocket, but she ignored it, her hands resting stiffly by her sides. Finally, Riker stepped back, placing one hand on his radio. "Dispatch, run a check on plate number," he began, reciting the digits carefully. A moment later, the voice on the other end responded. "Copy that, Riker. Stand by." It was only a few seconds, but to Tasha, it felt like hours. She could hear her own breathing, shaky and shallow, and tried to steady herself. In her mind, she thought about her kids waiting at home and silently prayed she'd be there to read them their bedtime story like she promised. Then, the voice came back over the radio. Unit 4, plates are registered to Atasha Miller, valid license, no outstanding reports. Vehicle clear. The air seemed to shift instantly. Riker paused, staring at the radio as though replaying the words in his head. He looked back at Tasha, his jaw tight, but his voice softer now. "All right," he said slowly, handing her license back. "You're free to go." Tasha took her ID carefully, her hands still trembling, though she tried to hide it. She managed a quiet thank you, though her voice carried more exhaustion than relief. Before she could move, however, one of the bystanders, an older woman with silver hair, spoke up loudly from her car. "She didn't do anything wrong," the woman said firmly. "You scared her half to death for no reason." Others murmured in agreement, though no one raised their voice beyond that. Riker glanced around at the small crowd forming, his expression unreadable. He gave a curt nod, turned, and walked back to his cruiser without another word. As he drove away, the gas station slowly returned to normal, but the atmosphere lingered with tension. The people who had recorded the interaction were already uploading the video online. Tasha remained by her car, leaning against the door as she tried to catch her breath. A young woman from another pump approached her cautiously. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. Tasha nodded, forcing a small smile, though her eyes were glossy. "Yeah," she whispered, "I'm okay." She got back into her car, started the engine, and drove away. But the moment stayed with her. Every detail, the setting sun, the crowd, the quiet voices, was etched into her memory. What she didn't know was that the video captured that evening would spread far beyond Brooksville. Within hours, it would be shared across social media, sparking conversations that would change her life, and Officer Riker's, forever. That night, at home, Tasha hugged her kids a little tighter than usual. She didn't tell them what had happened, but they noticed she was quieter at dinner, lost in thought. She kept replaying the moment in her head, questioning why it had unfolded the way it did. Why her? Why tonight? And most of all, she wondered how many others had experienced the same thing but never had anyone record it, never had anyone believe them. Across town, Riker sat in his own home, restless and unable to sleep. He replayed the encounter, too, though for very different reasons. In his mind, he justified his actions as following procedure, but somewhere deep down, he couldn't ignore the looks on the faces at the gas station, the quiet judgment in their eyes. Neither of them knew it yet, but this single encounter would set off a chain of events that neither could escape.